Look, I'm going to tell you about the day the entire Galactic Council realized they'd been doing risk assessment completely wrong for approximately 3,000 years. And no, before you ask, it wasn't because of some grand scientific breakthrough or philosophical revelation. It was because of Jennifer Martinez, a water treatment engineer from Ohio who apparently missed the memo about self-preservation being a desirable trait in sentient species. But I'm getting ahead of myself. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Let me paint you a picture. The Interspecies Cultural Exchange Summit on Valora Prime. Sounds fancy, right? It was fancy. The kind of fancy where they have 7 different types of atmospheric processors running simultaneously because half the delegates breathed methane, and the other half would literally explode if exposed to methane. The kind of fancy where the catering budget could fund a small planetary defense grid. You know, government fancy. I was there as part of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, which is a very impressive way of saying I was the person who made sure the human delegates didn't accidentally start an interstellar incident by doing something monumentally stupid. Again, it had happened before. There was the incident with Ambassador Patterson and the Crystalline Choir. We don't talk about that. Anyway, the summit was going about as well as you'd expect when you cram 200 different species into one place and expect them to agree on anything, which is to say, terribly. The Klendari Dominion was still upset about trade route negotiations from 6 months ago. The Thoraxian hive mind kept insisting they needed separate voting rights for each of their 7 billion constituent members. The plasma folk were complaining about the temperature being too cold, which, fair enough. They were balls of sentient ionized gas who considered 3,000 degrees Celsius chilly. And then there was us. Humanity. The new kids. The species that had stumbled into galactic civilization roughly 40 years prior when a Zentari scout ship landed in Tokyo and asked for directions. We were still learning the rules, still figuring out our place in this vast cosmic community. Most of the established species viewed us with what I can only describe as bemused tolerance. Like you might regard a puppy that keeps running into walls. Cute, kind of concerning, but ultimately harmless. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The summit was being held at the Grand Confluence Center, this absolutely massive complex built on the banks of the River Torash. Beautiful place if you ignored the fact that the river moved fast enough to qualify as a lethal projectile and contained approximately 47 different types of microorganisms that could kill you in creative ways. The Valorans, being aquatic themselves, had built their whole civilization around this river. They loved it. They also had natural armor plating and could process the toxic microorganisms like we process oxygen. Humans, as it turns out, did not have these advantages. The day it happened was the 3rd day of the summit. We were scheduled for a casual cultural exchange by the river, which was diplomatic speak for stand around awkwardly while trying not to offend anyone. Various species had brought their younglings. Yes, younglings. The Galactic Council had this whole thing about how showing your offspring demonstrated trust and commitment to peaceful relations. Personally, I thought it demonstrated poor risk assessment. But nobody asked me. The Thoraxians had brought some larvae. The Klendari had their cubs, these fuzzy little creatures that looked like someone had crossed a bear with a soap bubble. They were actually pretty adorable, floating around in their containment fields, making these chirping sounds. The Zentari had brought their juveniles, who mostly just looked like smaller, grumpier versions of adult Zentari. And then there was little Kessa, a Clendari cub belonging to Ambassador Threllick, who was kind of a big deal in the Dominion. Kessa was maybe 3 solar cycles old, which in Clendari terms meant she had the common sense of a potato and the curiosity of a cat that had been given espresso. You see where this is going, don't you? Jennifer Martinez was part of the Earth civilian scientific contingent. Water treatment engineer, like I said. She'd been invited because the summit had a whole track about environmental sustainability. And apparently humanity's recent breakthroughs in aquifer restoration were noteworthy. She was this short woman, maybe 5'3", with dark hair usually pulled back in a perpetual ponytail, and the kind of calm, methodical demeanor you'd expect from someone who spent their days thinking about sewage systems. I'd talked to her a few times. Nice person, slightly dry sense of humor. The kind of human who'd make a dad joke and then not even smile while you processed whether it was funny or not. She had a very sensible approach to everything. Measured, careful, boring, if I'm being honest. Which made what happened next so utterly insane. We were all standing around the river, making small talk through our translators. The weather on Valora Prime was pleasant, if you enjoyed humidity levels that made you feel like you were slowly being digested. The younglings were playing under the watchful eyes of their guardians and approximately 73 security protocols. Then Kessa, because the universe has a terrible sense of humor, spotted something shiny in the river. Now, Clendari cubs in their containment fields are supposed to be tethered to their guardians. Supposed to be. But Kessa's tether had apparently malfunctioned, which we'd discover later was due to an incompatibility between Clendari technology and Valoran electromagnetic fields. In the moment, all we knew was that this fuzzy little soap bubble of chaos went bobbing toward the river with increasing velocity, chirping excitedly. Ambassador, Threllick noticed. Kessa, return immediately. The translation came through tinny and alarmed. Kessa, having the listening skills of a brick, did not return immediately. Multiple things happened at once. Threllick lunged forward, but was a good 15 meters away. The Clendari security detail started moving, but they were positioned wrong, scattered around the perimeter. The other species delegates turned to look, processing what was happening with varying degrees of speed. The River Torash, as I mentioned, moved fast. Real fast. The kind of fast that if something fell in, that something was going downstream immediately and violently, probably while being dissolved by the aforementioned creative microorganisms. Kessa's containment field bobbed right to the edge of the river, teetered there for a moment that felt like an eternity compressed into a second, and then went in. Here's the thing about galactic civilization. It's very advanced, incredibly advanced. They have technology that can do things that would make a human physicist weep with joy and confusion. Faster than light travel, artificial gravity, consciousness transfer, weaponry that can crack planets like eggs. But evolution, as it turns out, is still evolution. And most intelligent species evolved with a very sensible approach to danger, which can be summarized as assess, plan, act carefully, preferably from a safe distance. The Clendari security detail was assessing the situation, calculating approach vectors, determining optimal retrieval strategies. This was happening fast by their standards. Maybe 3 seconds of processing. The Zentari delegates were backing away because their species had a very reasonable fear of fast-moving water due to their homeworld being a desert planet. The Thoraxians were conferencing with themselves through their hive mind, trying to achieve consensus on an action plan. Ambassador Threllick was screaming, running forward. But even with his species' superior speed, the math wasn't mathing. Kessa was in the river. The containment field was already failing from the pressure, and she was moving downstream fast. 3 seconds had elapsed, maybe 4. And then Jennifer Martinez, who had been standing about 8 meters from the river's edge, just dove in. No hesitation, no assessment, no risk calculation. One moment she was standing there, holding a data pad about pH levels. And the next, she was in the air, in a horizontal dive that would have made an Olympic swimmer nod with approval. She hit the water maybe 6 meters downstream from where Kessa went in. Dead silence from the assembled delegates. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop, if anyone had bothered to drop a pin, and if the sound wasn't drowned out by the roar of the river. Someone, I think it was the Zentari delegation lead, said through their translator, "Did that human just jump into the river Tarash?" Yes. Yes, she had. Jennifer surfaced about 2 seconds later, already being carried downstream at a truly alarming rate. Her arm was up, and in her hand was Kessa's containment field, the cub still inside, still intact. Then the current took them both around a bend. The next 15 minutes were absolute chaos. The Klendari security detail finally launched their retrieval drones. The Valoran hosts deployed their river rescue teams, who were very good at river rescue because, again, this was their home world, and they'd built their entire civilization around this death trap of a waterway. The summit organizers were screaming into communicators. Ambassador Threlick was having what I can only describe as a complete psychological break. I was running along the riverside with about 40 other people, most of whom were also screaming into communicators. Here's another fun fact about humans that the galaxy hadn't fully appreciated. We're persistence hunters. We have stupid amounts of endurance. We can keep going when most other species would have collapsed. And Jennifer Martinez, in addition to being a water treatment engineer, had apparently been a competitive swimmer in college. She was in that river for approximately 14 minutes. 14 minutes of being swept downstream, smashed into rocks, partially dissolved by alien microorganisms, and somehow, keeping Kessa's containment field above water. When the Valoran rescue team finally pulled them both out, about 3 kilometers downstream, Jennifer was unconscious. Kessa was traumatized, but alive. The containment field had held. The medical team swarmed them both. The Klendari medics took Kessa, and the human medical unit took Jennifer. I got there about 2 minutes later, completely out of breath, legs burning, having just run 3 kilometers in humid alien atmosphere. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, our head physician, was already working on Jennifer. She was covered in lacerations. Her left arm was clearly broken. The exposed skin was showing the early stages of chemical burns from the river's microorganisms. She was hypothermic despite the warm climate, because the river was apparently fed by underground glaciers. "Is she going to make it?" I asked, because I have a gift for asking stupid questions during crises. Dr. Tanaka didn't even look up. "Probably. Humans are annoyingly hard to kill. But she's going to be in a medical pod for a week." Did she seriously just dive into an alien river without any protective gear to save a Klendari cub? Appears so. Why would she do that? Dr. Tanaka finally looked at me. Because it's what humans do, apparently. Now, either help or get out of my way. I got out of her way. By the time I made it back to the main summit area, the news had spread. And I mean, it had spread. Every delegation was talking about it. The footage from security cameras and personal recording devices had already been shared across official and unofficial channels. The Klendari delegation was in an uproar. Ambassador Threlick was demanding to see Jennifer, demanding updates on her condition, demanding to know why a human would risk their life for a Klendari cub. The other delegations were equally confused. The Thoraxians had analyzed the footage and calculated that Jennifer's actions had a 73% probability of resulting in her death. The Zentari were trying to understand the decision matrix that would lead to such an action. The plasma folk were just confused because their species didn't really have a concept of drowning and found the whole situation bizarre. I found myself in an impromptu meeting with the senior Terran diplomats, trying to explain what had happened and why. "She just jumped in," I said for the 5th time. No hesitation. Just saw a kid in danger and reacted. Ambassador Chen, our delegation lead, rubbed his temples. "This is going to cause problems." "Problems? She saved a child." "Yes, and now every species at this summit is trying to recalculate their understanding of human behavior. Do you understand what this means?" I did, actually. First, contact protocols, risk assessment models, cultural evaluation matrices. Every species had spent the last 40 years trying to figure out how humans fit into the galactic community. We were aggressive, but not as aggressive as the Kelon warlords. We were intelligent, but not as intelligent as the algorithmic collective. We were social, but not as social as the hive minds. We were, by most metrics, pretty average. Middle of the pack, nothing special. Except apparently when it came to doing incredibly stupid, brave things without thinking. Over the next few hours, something strange started happening. Delegations began requesting meetings with the human contingent. Not official diplomatic meetings, personal conversations. They wanted to understand. The Thoraxian hive mind sent a representative. "We have analyzed the footage," they said through their translator, "and we cannot find a logical decision tree that results in Engineer Martinez's actions. Can you explain her reasoning? How do you explain instinct to a species that makes decisions through collective consensus? How do you explain that sometimes humans just act, that we see someone in danger and we move, and we don't do the risk assessment or the cost-benefit analysis, we just go?" I tried. I don't think I did a great job. The Zentari were more direct. "Is this a common human trait? This disregard for personal safety in service of protecting others?" "I mean, yeah," I said, which in retrospect was not the most diplomatic answer. "It's not universal, but it's not rare either. We call them heroes." "You have a word for individuals who engage in high-risk protective behaviors?" "We have several words, actually. Hero, brave, courageous, selfless. We write stories about people like this. We give them medals. We teach our children to aspire to be like them." The Zentari delegate was silent for a long moment. "Your species culturally celebrates individuals who risk death to protect non-kin members of non-allied species?" When they put it that way, it did sound kind of insane. "Yes?" More silence. Then, "Fascinating and terrifying." Ambassador Threllick finally got to see Jennifer on the 2nd day after the incident. She was still in the medical pod, but conscious and aware. I was there as a diplomatic observer, which meant I got to stand in the corner and watch. Threllick approached the pod slowly. Klendari are large beings, nearly 8 feet tall, with thick armor plating and 4 arms. They evolved as apex predators on their homeworld. They're not used to feeling vulnerable. "Engineer Martinez," Threllick said through the translator, and I could hear the emotion even through the artificial voice. "You saved my daughter." Jennifer, looking like she'd gone 12 rounds with a rock tumbler and lost, managed a weak smile. "Is she okay?" "She is perfect, unharmed, thanks to you." A pause. "Why did you do this thing? You did not know her. You owed us no debt. The risk was extreme." Jennifer looked confused by the question. "She was a kid. She was in danger. That is sufficient reason for you to risk death?" Yeah, Jennifer said, which apparently was the standard human response to this question. I saw her go in. I knew I could swim. I just reacted. Didn't really think about it. You did not think about it, Threllick repeated slowly. No time to think. Thinking would have wasted seconds. I watched Threllick process this. The translator was silent for almost 30 seconds. In Klendari culture, Threllick finally said, there is no greater debt than a life debt. You have saved the life of my daughter. By our customs, I owe you everything. My life, my resources, my loyalty, all of it. Oh no, that's really not necessary, Jennifer started, looking uncomfortable. It is not a choice, Threllick said firmly. It is what is owed, what is right. You gave everything with no expectation of return. I can do no less. Jennifer looked at me helplessly. I shrugged. Life debts were a thing in several galactic cultures. She was just going to have to deal with having a powerful alien ambassador as her eternal best friend. Okay, Jennifer said weakly. Thank you. The story spread. Of course it spread. This was an interspecies summit with delegates from across the galaxy. Within 3 days, every member species of the Galactic Council knew about the human who dove into the River Tarash. The reactions were varied and fascinating. The Algorithmic Collective submitted a formal request for Jennifer to participate in a study on human decision-making processes. They were deeply puzzled by the entire incident and wanted to understand how a species could be both intelligent and seemingly suicidal. The Kellan warlords, who everyone was kind of scared of, sent a message of respect. Apparently they recognized and appreciated bravery, even if the context was weird. There were rumors they'd started referring to humans as the small mad ones in their internal communications, which, considering their language, was probably a compliment. Several species requested updates to their human interaction protocols, not because they thought we were dangerous, but because they realized their existing models were incomplete. They'd categorized us based on technology, biology, and social structures. They'd missed something fundamental about human nature. We do stupid, brave things for strangers. We'd risk everything for someone we didn't know, someone who wasn't our kin, someone who wasn't even our species. Not because it made logical sense, not because we expected reward, but because it felt right. That scared some species, fascinated others, made everyone recalculate. Jennifer recovered, obviously. Humans are annoyingly resilient like that. Broken bones heal, chemical burns fade, trauma gets processed in therapy. She was back on her feet in 2 weeks, though Dr. Tanaka banned her from going near any bodies of water for the remainder of the summit. The summit itself ended successfully, surprisingly. Turns out, almost dying together builds diplomatic bridges really effectively. The trade route disputes got resolved. The Thoraxians agreed to a compromise on voting rights. Even the plasma folks stopped complaining about the temperature. And Jennifer Martinez, water treatment engineer from Ohio, became the most famous human in galactic civilization without trying. She hated it, for the record. She gave exactly 1 interview, and it was the most Jennifer response possible. Interviewer: what were you thinking when you dove into the river? Jennifer: kid in water. Get kid out of water. That was pretty much it. Interviewer: you weren't afraid? Jennifer: I was busy. Fear takes time. Interviewer: do you feel like a hero? Jennifer: I feel like someone who needs to get back to work. Do you know how many planets in this sector have untreated water supplies? That's the real emergency. The interview went viral. Several species found it hilarious. Others found it disturbing. The algorithmic collective filed it under Human Psychological Aberration, Case Study 7043. 3 months after the summit, something interesting happened. The Galactic Council voted to establish the Martinez Protocol, a new emergency response framework based on human intervention strategies. The core principle was simple. Sometimes the fastest response is better than the most calculated response. Sometimes you need someone who'll just act. They started training mixed-species rapid response teams with humans as core members. Turned out our instinct to immediately help, combined with our physical endurance and our absurd resistance to dying, made us really good at emergency situations. Who knew? I visited Jennifer about 6 months later. She was back on Earth, back to her normal job, working on a water treatment project in Nevada. "So," I said, sitting in her office, which was exactly as boring as you'd expect a water treatment engineer's office to be, "you're galactically famous now." "Don't remind me," she said, not looking up from her reports. "I got a message from the Zentari last week. They want to name a river after me." "That's an honor. It's a toxic river on a planet I can't even breathe the atmosphere on. What am I supposed to do with that? Appreciate the gesture?" She finally looked at me. "You know what's funny? Everyone keeps asking me why I did it. Like it's some big mystery. Like there was this complex decision-making process." "And there wasn't?" "No," she said simply. "I saw a kid drowning. I was the closest person who could swim. That's it. That's the whole story. Why is that so hard for everyone to understand?" "Because most species don't work that way," I explained. "They assess risk. They calculate outcomes. They have biological imperatives against putting themselves in danger for non-kin." "That sounds lonely," Jennifer said. And that, I think, was when I really understood what made humans different. It wasn't that we were braver or stronger or smarter than other species. It was that we couldn't stand the idea of being alone in our suffering. We saw someone in pain, someone in danger, and we instinctively wanted to help. Not because it was logical, not because we expected reward, but because isolation was worse than risk. We were a species that would literally rather die than watch someone else suffer alone. The galaxy was still trying to figure out if that made us heroes or idiots. Maybe we were both. Jennifer went back to her reports. I sat there for a while longer, watching her work, thinking about rivers and cubs and humans who dove in without hesitation. Ambassador Threllick visited Earth once, about a year after the incident. Brought Kessa with him. The cub was bigger now, less fuzzy, more aware of the world. They met Jennifer in a park in Ohio. Kessa, through a translator, said, "Are you the human who saved me?" Jennifer knelt down to be at eye level with the containment field. "I am. How are you doing?" "I am well. Father says I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Jennifer said gently. "I'm just glad you're okay." "Father says humans are crazy." Jennifer laughed. "Yeah, we kind of are." "I think crazy's good," Kessa said. "I think crazy is brave." Jennifer looked up at Threllick, who was watching the interaction with what I'd learned to recognize as Klendari emotion. "Your daughter is very wise." "She takes after her mother," Threllick said. "And perhaps a little after you." Later, after the Klendari had left, I asked Jennifer if she regretted it. The diving in, the injuries, the galactic fame she never wanted. She thought about it for a long time. "No," she finally said. "I'd do it again, every time, without hesitation." "Even knowing how much it would hurt?" "Especially knowing," she said. "Because that's what it means to be human, right? We know it might hurt. We know we might die. We do it anyway, Because the alternative is watching someone drown and doing nothing, and that's not pain we can survive. I think about that conversation a lot. I think about Jennifer and Kessa and a river on an alien world. I think about the moment between seeing danger and acting on it. That tiny space where most species pause to calculate and humans just move. The galaxy is vast and old, and filled with species far more advanced than us. They can do things we can only dream of. They have technologies and philosophies and cultures that make human civilization look like we're still drawing on cave walls. But they don't have what we have. They don't have that instinct to dive in, to risk everything, to put someone else's safety above our own without thinking about it. Some call it crazy, some call it brave. The Algorithmic Collective has 17 different terms for it in their databases, none of which quite capture what it means. I just call it human. Jennifer Martinez never got a medal from Earth. She never got a parade or a statue or anything like that. But somewhere on Valora Prime, there's a monument by the River Took. It's simple. A plaque with her name and a single sentence in Standard Galactic. She dove before anyone moved. And across the galaxy, in 1,000 different languages and communication protocols, that sentence has become synonymous with a particular kind of courage. The human kind. The kind that doesn't wait, doesn't hesitate, doesn't calculate the cost. The kind that sees someone drowning and just dives in. Because that's what humans do. We're the species that jumps into alien rivers to save strangers' children. We're the species that risks everything for nothing. We're the species that, when faced with someone in danger, doesn't ask, "Why should I help?" but, "How fast can I get there?" The galaxy is still trying to figure out if we're heroes or idiots. Personally, I think we're both. And I think that's exactly why we belong out here among the stars, showing everyone else what crazy brave looks like. Jennifer would hate that I wrote this. She'd say I'm making too big a deal out of it. She'd say she was just doing what anyone would do, which is exactly the kind of thing a human would say, because we genuinely don't understand why everyone else finds our behavior so remarkable. But I'm writing it anyway, because someone needs to document this. Someone needs to record the moment the galaxy realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our intelligence or our adaptability. It was our inability to stand by and watch someone drown. The river took the cub. The human dove before anyone moved. And that, I think, is the entire story of humanity in one sentence. Welcome to the galaxy. Sorry if we scare you by being helpful. We can't help it. It's just what we do.